What if you were chosen to behold the unseeable, to witness the very throne of God? Would you be prepared for the revelation that would shake your soul? Meet Ezekiel, a prophet who stood at the crossroads of chaos, his heart pounding with a message that would shake the foundations of humanity. Among the Jewish exiles in Babylon, he received an extraordinary calling to proclaim God's judgment and redemption to a rebellious people. But little did Ezekiel know, his life was about to take a dramatic turn. A vision of unimaginable proportions was about to unfold before his eyes, a spectacle that would leave him breathless and changed forever. The throne of God, a sight so awe-inspiring, so heart-stopping, that it would sear itself into his very being. A vision that would reveal the inner workings of heaven, the majesty of God's throne, and the mysterious creatures that surrounded it. A vision that would shatter Ezekiel's perceptions and leave him trembling with fear and wonder. Watch as we uncover the extraordinary story of Ezekiel, the prophet who saw too much. Can a single moment change the course of a life forever? For Ezekiel, the answer was about to become a resounding yes. It started with a whirlwind, a maelstrom of wind and debris that seemed to come from nowhere and everywhere at once. The air was thick with an otherworldly presence, as if the very fabric of reality was about to be torn apart. And then, a cloud appeared, a vast, towering monolith of vapor that seemed to stretch up to the heavens. The cloud pulsed with an electric intensity, as if it were alive and watching Ezekiel with an unblinking gaze. But it was what came next that would leave Ezekiel breathless and trembling. A chariot of fire, borne aloft on the whirlwind, descended from the cloud, wheels within wheels, a blur of motion that seemed to defy the laws of nature, rotated with a hypnotic rhythm, and at the center of it all, the throne of God, a seat of power and judgment that seemed to burn with an inner fire. The whirlwind spoke of God's fierce judgment, sweeping away all that was impure and unholy. The cloud represented the mystery and transcendence of God's nature, a reminder that he was beyond human comprehension. And the fire symbolized the purifying power of God's presence, a flame that would burn away all pretenses and leave only truth and righteousness standing. As Ezekiel gazed upon this spectacle, he knew that he was in the presence of the divine. His life would never be the same, for he had been chosen to bear witness to the raw power of God. What if you were to behold a sight so fantastical, so beyond the bounds of human comprehension, that it would challenge everything you thought you knew about the universe? Ezekiel was about to encounter just such a sight, a vision that would sear itself into his mind and change him forever. As he gazed upon the throne of God, he saw 4 living creatures, each more bizarre and wondrous than the last. They had the body of a lion, the face of an eagle, the wings of a bird, and the hands of a man. Their eyes burned with an inner fire, as if they saw right through to the soul. But it was their movement that was truly mesmerizing. They darted back and forth, their wings beating in hypnotic rhythm, as if they were alive and in constant motion. And then, Ezekiel saw the wheels within wheels, a blur of motion that seemed to defy the laws of physics. The wheels turned within each other, a dazzling display of celestial mechanics that seemed to pulse with the very heartbeat of God. The creatures and the wheels were not just random visions. They represented the very fabric of God's throne, the seat of his power and judgment. The creatures symbolized the 4 aspects of God's nature: strength, wisdom, grace, and sovereignty. And the wheels represented the dynamic, ever-moving power of God, always in motion, always at work in the universe. As Ezekiel watched, transfixed, the creatures and wheels seemed to blend together, becoming a blur of color and motion that seemed to pull him in, deeper and deeper, into the heart of God. What if you were to behold the very seat of divine power, the throne from which the universe is governed? Would you be able to handle the splendors, the majesty, and the sheer awe-inspiring wonder of it all? Ezekiel was about to find out. As he gazed upon the throne of God, he saw a sight that defied description. The throne itself was like a sea of crystal, a glittering expanse of light that seemed to pulse with the very heartbeat of God. And above the throne, a rainbow stretched out, its vibrant colors glowing with an otherworldly intensity. But it was the voice that spoke from the throne that left Ezekiel trembling. A voice like thunder, yet gentle as a summer breeze, boomed out, shaking the very foundations of his being. The voice spoke of judgment, of righteousness, and of redemption. A voice that seemed to hold the very fate of the universe in its balance. The rainbow was no mere ornament. It symbolized the covenant between God and humanity, a promise of hope and redemption in a world torn apart by sin and destruction. And the voice was the very essence of God's being, a manifestation of his power, wisdom, and love. As Ezekiel listened, entranced, the voice seemed to grow louder, more insistent, as if it was calling him to a higher purpose, a greater destiny. And he knew, in that moment, that he was forever changed, forever bound to the throne of God and the majesty that sat upon it. How would you react if you were confronted with the raw power and majesty of God? Ezekiel was about to find out. As he gazed upon the throne of God, he was overcome with a sense of awe and wonder. He fell to the ground, his face pressed into the dirt, unable to bear the weight of God's glory. And yet, even as he trembled with fear, he felt a sense of reverence, a sense of worship that seemed to well up from the very depths of his soul. Ezekiel's response was not just a reaction, it was a revelation. It showed that he was a man who knew his place before God, a man who recognized the vast chasm between human frailty and divine majesty. His response was a testament to the power of God to humble, to awe, and to transform. As he lay there, trembling and worshiping, Ezekiel knew that he was being called to a higher purpose. He was being called to speak for God, to proclaim his message to a world in chaos, and he knew that he would never be the same again, that he had been forever changed by the encounter with the divine. Ezekiel's response was a reminder that true worship is not about grand gestures or flowery words. It's about humility, reverence, and a willingness to be transformed by the power of God. Ezekiel's vision of God's throne was a revelation of divine majesty, a glimpse into the very heart of God. We've seen the whirlwind, the cloud, and the fire that announced God's presence. We've beheld the four living creatures and the wheels within wheels that symbolized God's power and movement. We've witnessed the throne itself, with its sea of crystal and radiant rainbow. And we've seen Ezekiel's response, a humble and reverent acknowledgement of God's glory. But what does this vision mean for us today? It reminds us that God is still on his throne, still sovereign over all. It shows us that God's power and majesty are still beyond our comprehension, still awe-inspiring and humbling. And it calls us to respond with reverence and worship, to acknowledge God's glory and majesty in our lives. Ezekiel's vision is a reminder that God is not distant or detached, but actively involved in our world. It's a call to trust in God's sovereignty, to hope in his redemption, and to live in reverence of his majesty. May we, like Ezekiel, be transformed by the power of God's presence, and may we proclaim his glory to a world in need of his redemption.